with this week's program. We're going to be looking at animal health, prevention and cure. We're going to be looking at animal nutrition. We're also going to be catching up with the most innovative thing to hit irrigation for quite some time. And imagine land like that, and you're going to be able to irrigate it with no fluff flow. So it's not going to go all down into the bottom, it's going to stay there. Keep on that one. And we're also going to be talking to Linda from Federated Farmers. But first up, Jim, interesting season. Getting a bit sort of tacky underfoot, or are you guys okay?
Yeah, well, we're pretty happy because the soil profile now is starting to get some real moisture into it. We've had some frequent rains through the summer period, if that's what it was, and but it only really went down 2 or 3, probably, I don't know, 3 centimetres, say. Now that's quite good, settled dust, but it doesn't really do a heck of a lot for continual root development and things of that nature. So now that we're starting to get these reasonably constant rain showers that are slow and warm and wet, they're going into the profile very, very well. So from an ongoing maximising fertiliser and planting and things like that, it's all in good. If I was a grape grower, I would not be a happy person.
Right.
Those poor guys are in the middle of right in the middle of our grape harvest, and we're getting these conditions over most of the east side of New Zealand. And I know that some of the Marlborough guys and certainly the North Canterbury and Central Otago guys are getting a bit grumpy.
When does botulism hit? Because that's something that I would associate with
about
rain.
10 days ago.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, the conditions have been good up until this week, where we continue to have reasonably good. I mean, people will say, well, it's very autumny, it's got quite cool, but 18 or 19 degrees with nice moisture, and the night temperature's not going down too low. Botrytis has really started to get going this week, especially on the lighter skinned varieties such as Pinot Noir. Chardonnay fortunately is gone, so that's good. And of course then we get onto the main Sauvignon Blanc. So there's a bit of fun out there. Yep. So
how bad is it? I mean, can you spray against it, or are we just going to have a huge volume of stickies this year?
No, not at all. There's some varieties that actually need a bit of botrytis, especially Riesling, what have you, so that'll actually be ideal. Yes, there's a little bit more botrytis than they would really like, but no, they will be able to manipulate that in the winemaking process. So there won't be a whole lot of stickies come out of it, and there still should be some very good wines come out of it. But it just makes the making a little bit more human intervention, where before it's really nice to let the vine make the wine.
So I remember years and years and years ago, I was shooting birds to keep them off geese and the things we do. But anyway, Marcel came in one morning and it had been raining like we'd just been having. And he said, the Riesling is rotten. And he was really upset. Red-rimmed eyes. He said it. Then he won a gold medal at the London Wine Competition with exactly that fruit.
Yep. Well, what can happen is that you can look at it when you get in the winery and think, right, okay, I'll make a really good sticky out of this. And you don't make stickies every year, because fortunately we don't have these sort of conditions every year. Now look, next week it could be blowing northerly breezes all through New Zealand, and the botrytis will go, it'll clean up. There's nothing from a chemical point of view you need to put on or would put on close to harvest. So it's just freak of nature, that's just the way it is.
Wet weather elsewhere apart from in the vineyards, I instantly also think of leaves and problems with that. Yep.
What we're having now, there is early what we call leaf senescence. In other words, the leaves are breaking down on all the various horticultural crops. It's a good thing, that what growers must do when that does happen, especially with a bit of moisture about, and that is to spray with a bit of copper. Copper
you
hydroxide.
Love copper, don't you?
Yeah, well, we don't overdo it in New Zealand. In fact, we underspray for copper.
Do we?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you compare what we do in New Zealand to what they do in Europe, you'll be horrified. And we do not suffer from copper toxicities in terms of on land. So what we do is we use the hydroxide type materials that are very fine, microfined, and 1 or 2 applications at this time of the year is very beneficial. One at the moment with calcium attached with that calcium nitrate helps to break down that trash even more and cleans up any fungus that may be around, especially any leaf spot diseases. So yeah, it's a really good remedy. That then goes on the ground, cleans up and rots down quite nicely.
Great. And what's left over you can use in the spring for frost protection?
Yes, there won't be much left over by then, but you'd have a look at reapplying that type of material in the spring, which is still kilos per hectare under what they do in the European countries. Okay. So we're in good shape.
getting ready for planting?
Yeah, this is the time of the year now that the soil conditions have got some moisture there. Unfortunately, most growers that I discuss with on a regular basis, they put their autumn fertilisers on, so that's going down now into the soil profile. It's not being wasted. It's going to go down into the root area, well, where the roots and young root hairs are going to be going forward when you start either planting or have got young crops out there, whatever they may be. So especially when you've got a little bit of phosphorus in there, which is very good for root development. So what I say to growers now, turn that soil over when they can, get grubbing it, well, say plough it or whatever they're going to do, get grubbing it, get it cleaned up, get the weeds that are down there, get their roots up onto the surface. The frost will take care of them, and then before we have our traditional rains around early spring, say August, you plant whatever horticulture crop you're going to put in.
Would you expect to strike this time of year of weeds?
Yes, you do, and they're easily dealt with by regular cultivation rather than actually chemical application.
So you put a grubber over it?
Yes, 2 or 3 litres of a glyphosate Roundup would do the job quite nicely and clean up any little flatweeds that are there, because they're all in the very much in the wee small dicotyledon stage. So don't take much to take out. Gives a nice clean soil profile and good for planting. I dare say we will have rains in August, we normally do, and it's nice to have, whether it be young trees or vines or sticks or whatever in the ground prior to that, and then that rain helps to settle them into the ground, the soil around them, and of course they get away when the temperatures warm up again.
Soil tests? Yeah,
really important. There are a number of horticultural results I see through the year that have got a concerning level of what we call a pH, and it's a bit. Some of them are a bit low. To get a maximum out of your micro and macronutrients, you need to have a pH in your soil of around about 6 to 6.3, preferably 6.3, 6.5 in horticultural crops and in pastoral application for that matter. So a number of the, quite too many really, a number of results I've seen have been around 5.4, 5.7. Now that's quite low. So what I suggest to growers there is they apply an optimised lime, or which they can add nutrients to it such as boron or potassium, and or agricultural lime, which takes longer to work, but over 2 years, especially in the younger establishment period of any crop, you can build up your pH and maximise it 2 or 3 years' time. So it's a constant application, looking at it on a regular basis. In the past we used to say 3 years, now we're saying 2 years, and in some crops that are what we call hungry, in other words they use a lot of fertiliser, we suggest the growers actually test every year.
So what about the humus? Because I'm assuming that when you're starting to put in horticultural type stuff, it's not nitrogen fixing for a start.
It's good to have some organic matter there, and you can do that by trash or putting in green feed and then turning it over and burying it in there and building up some organic matter prior to planting or during the process. It's quite a good idea to put grass type sow out, like some rye corn and maybe chicory and things like that. Put them into the ground, they penetrate, they've got a long root, and then you actually blow them off with a bit of glyphosate later on, and you turn them into compost. And that's really good and feeds the ground very, very well and gets your organic matter up.
Yeah, that's a good hint, because you can't keep cropping.
No. The other big thing, and it's an industry-wide thing, that's of course the level of nitrate in the soil, and it's a huge thing media-wise and everything else, and so it should be. Now, if you do these sort of management applications and do more of the natural type application rather than pouring nitrogen on all the time, because we are restricted to levels of nitrate in the soil going forward. So these sort of things, keeping the organic matter up, keeping your moisture right,
and that
checking, oh absolutely, and checking that your fertiliser is what you're putting on is being used, because that's what it should be. It shouldn't be accumulated. I mean, honestly, some of those lemon paddocks out there, you can mine phosphate out of them. That's how high they are. It's ridiculous. So, and farmers have now become far more conscious of that, and are doing, I think, a very good job.
To treat your farm like you would your veggie garden.
Absolutely. Dead right.
Jimmy, thank you very much indeed. After the break, we have a look at a revolutionary irrigation plant that will actually do, seriously, very, very steep slopes. back to Rob's Country. Well, irrigation is obviously a thing of the present and definitely of the future. So it's not unusual to have an industry like that looking at bettering everything that there already is. RX Plastics have come up with what they call the G-set.
On this particular occasion, a customer came to us with an idea that they felt solid set irrigation had a place, but not on a post that cows push over, and they'd seen a lot of problems in that area. And a relatively short time ago, a customer came to us with an idea, and we took that idea and developed it.
About 15 months?
15 months, yeah. October 13th, 12 months ago, sticks in my mind.
So tell me the principle, how does it work?
Well, it's our take on a solid set system. Solid set systems have always been very much sought after, but everybody falls off their chair when you give them a price. Just not economic. I mean, they say, hey, but we can do it at the local golf club, we can do it in all sorts of horticultural areas where the crops are very high value, but for broad acre pastoral, it was just ridiculously scary.
You're talking a sprinkler on top of a post?
A sprinkler on top of a post, a pop-up, like in a golf course situation, they're pop-ups in the greens and in the fairways. Pop-ups are probably one of the most common for solid set. On posts, in rows, pipes laid out, there's all sorts of solid set systems, but just ridiculously high capital value, mainly because you've got to have sufficient pipe size to carry all your water to every point on your property, which most systems you can telescope out and make your pipes a little bit smaller. With our system here, we've decided to go for control as being the key, which enables us to use a low value pipe through the majority of the system, a 63mm PE that can be cheaply mole ploughed into the ground behind a bulldozer, and then we put a string of pods onto that, and then operate each one individually. So only one sprinkler is going on a ring main of up to possibly 48 pods. We split that into 48 half-hour time slots, and then the sprinkler runs for half an hour, puts on the previous day's transevaporation, and keeps the plant running at 100%.
So it's one at a time, it's not sort of mass launching then?
Not mass launching at all, no. 1/48th of any given area will be operating at any one time. So if it's a full-scale property, it would have any number of ring mains, each ring main having one sprinkler operating on it at any one time.
It's interesting, Tony, you're using it on very steep country, and you're also using it in corners where centre pivots aren't working.
Yeah, we identified before we started 2 areas where they were going to have a place. Someone invests a lot of money on a centre pivot, and they end up with at best 14% of their farm having to have some other type of irrigation, and they didn't want, having no labour on their pivot, they didn't want to have any labour in their corners, and when you're not, those corner areas are odd shapes and quite hard to get good coverage, and you've still got to have someone running around. So in a paddock like this one, we can see a couple of pivots. I mean, we're just filling in the V's, or the areas that the pivot can't reach to. Behind me is a corner that just ducks away a little bit, and we have 8 units in there, 8 units up on the hill, and then there's a corner over here that has 7 units in, giving 100% coverage for this area.
Let's have a look at this property, because it's quite hilly, and the guy had illusions of grandeur that you were able to fix.
Absolutely. I mean, this property's been bought from a sheep beef operation, mainly sheep, because it's pretty hard country without any water. And on the surface, he was going to be able. He bought it at the right price to be able to farm this, fully utilising about 56% of the property. Now, with the addition of GSET, he's going to utilise about 98% of the property.
So, are they complicated? You've got to do fluckany in your hand, which looks a bit complicated to a layman.
Yeah, devil's in the detail. The basic system is very simple, but it's hard to make it simple. It's taken a few sleepless nights to get to this point, and the fundamentals are very simple. The implementation is critical. The devil is in the detail. Get some of that detail wrong and you will not get the right result. Yeah, there's a lot in the background before you start installing the GSETs into the ground. You get that right, it's simple.
You guys are there to support.
Yeah, pretty much. It's not so much us. We're the manufacturer. We're doing as much of the groundwork as we possibly can think of in terms of pointing out pitfalls and all of the points that need to be considered. But this is a product that you need a competent irrigation engineer involved with in terms of the mapping of your property and the setting out and getting the right result. So the product will only ever be sold through irrigation companies that have those competencies.
Doesn't look as though wind would affect it much.
No, I mean, we've deliberately gone for a large sprinkler, low pressure, large droplet size, low to the ground. So of any of the systems that are out there, we will get the minimum disruption from wind.
How do you get on with your steep country and it flowing off?
Well, because the system is designed just to put back 1 day's transevaporation, each sprinkler is only running for around about, ballpark figure, half an hour. It's putting on 6 mils. 6 mils doesn't run off. The leaf structure and the soil structure is quite capable of grabbing 6 mils and holding it in place.
And this is going to revolutionise the steep country like what we're looking at behind us even?
Absolutely. It's one of the driving forces behind the original concept was the fact that country is getting more and more marginal. People are moving out into the hills, and hill country irrigation is challenging. You can't use traditional methods because of the runoff and erosion and all of those things. Quite frankly, our other product, K-Line, is widely used on hills, and some of it is starting to test the health and safety requirements of a farm, and some of it's just not quite smart.
But this will work. But
we can replace it, and with GSET, and the GSET is significantly better on those steep to undulating
and of course it would make the banking fraternity smile.
Well, it does, in the respect that a lot of this country is relatively cheap because of its previous limitations. So now if you can get water we can provide a very reliable, very efficient way of getting it onto the ground, and all of a sudden that marginal land is as productive as any land in the country, and the banks like productive. They like guaranteed income. So to date, on the projects that we've been involved with, the support from the banking fraternity has been very, very positive, because we're taking away one of the unknowns, which is, how many weeks of good production are we going to get?
Tony, 15 months of R&D, are you ready to sort of get it out into the community now? Pretty much, yeah. I mean, we deliberately went and did it
under the radar, so to speak, but even then it's been hard. The people are hearing about it. The grapevine's a wonderful thing, and we'd have over 700 in the field. Most of them are going most of the summer, and which has allowed us to get some real information, iron out a few bugs, and we believe we've got something quite robust. We're planning on a number of control systems. We have a battery control system, which is 100% robust and working absolutely fine, which just controls a single unit, and the challenge with that is that you've got to set them up on a bench, synchronise all the clocks, and then set them all, and then at their half-hour intervals, and then go and put them out. So only really practical for up to 50, or if you're a bold sort of person, 70. I have no doubt that there will be people who are prepared to persevere and do slightly larger numbers than that, but pretty time consuming, albeit only once, and then each time the batteries need replaced about every 5 years. Would that be the case? But for all intents and purposes, some of the big properties, it's just not viable. So we've gone to the trouble of teaming up with some experts, and because there's nothing available worldwide, nothing available to satisfy our needs, we've developed a radio mesh controller, which is what we have here today. And that allows us, if I can see one pod and that pod can see another pod, any one pod on the farm, from where I'm standing, I can program it and control it and turn it on, turn it off. So we no longer need line of sight from a given control point. We can do it. So in a property like this, you might be able to pick out the cow shed in the background. We could put a controller in there, and it will control every single pod on this property, even though it can't see it, for a number of hills and obstacles.
And of course it leaves the trees in place.
Leaves the trees in place, absolutely no problem. And we're getting a lot of interest from people who actually are seeing it as an alternative on some properties to a pivot, where the pivot, there's no ideal circles, and to get an ideal circle means taking out trees and the grandfather planted and things like that. I believe we'll see whole properties actually done in GSET that could have possibly had some of it done on pivots.
Kiwi ingenuity, isn't it absolutely fabulous? After the break, we're going to be talking about animal health, prevention and cure, but still to come, we're going to be talking nutrition, and we'll be talking to Linda from Federated Farmers. Welcome back to Rob's Country. Lactating in pregnant stock and the feeding thereof.
Yeah, so it's coming up to that time where this needs to be thought about. I always cringe coming into this period, because especially small acreages, we sometimes see them running into trouble, and unfortunately we often get called when it's far too late. So like most things, these issues are better managed appropriately and planned for, rather than having a disaster at the end of the cliff. So I think the big thing is everyone needs to understand that there's energy priorities in a pregnant animal or a lactating animal, and that priority is, for instance, in pregnancy, that no matter what, those babies are going to grow, and so energy is going to be diverted, and nutrients are going to be diverted to those growing fetuses, or feti, I guess we should say, and sometimes that's come off the mother's own back. And likewise in a lactation, the priority is to make milk to grow these youngsters, and that can again be a big draw off the mother's own back. So just to put things in perspective, if we compare a normal animal requiring maintenance energy requirements, that's a fully grown animal that's not pregnant, it's not producing milk, it's got no other demands on it. A pregnancy can rapidly require up to double that amount, and following birth lactation, 3 times the amount. So it's a real draw. And if you can imagine, often we find ourselves in situations where even on unirrigated land during harsh times, it's hard enough to actually maintain animals that just require maintenance. On top of that, we are loading on energy requirements for animals that are needing sometimes up to 3 times more than they require just to keep their own bodies functioning. It puts it in a little bit of perspective.
And it's not always easy to pick up either, is it, with sheep particularly?
Absolutely. So sheep's the classic, and unfortunately it is the species that we see the most problem in. Cattle, okay, there's some technical issues and some skills involved in knowing how, for instance, to condition score cattle adequately, but by and large people understand that you can look at certain parts of the cow's anatomy and see where there's lack of fat cover or muscle cover, and that can be equated to a level of nutrition and body condition. But of course, I guess it doesn't take a genius to understand that if you have a fleeced animal such as a sheep, you're already limited in this visual capacity. So the only real accurate way of condition scoring sheep, for instance, is to get your hand on them. And although there's very good systems of scoring sheep over the short rib, over the back, you don't have to get that technical. It's pretty easy to actually get your hand on a sheep and feel through the fleece that there's bony prominences where there should be muscle. I think most New Zealanders know what a lamb chop looks like or a mutton chop, so they can understand that pretty well. So again, it is important, and I've always said on this program how important it is to have a hands-on approach, and especially with sheep, you need to get your hands on them to understand what conditions being lost.
I suppose bovines, as in cattle, would they bellow when they're hungry, so it's a bit more obvious?
Of course they do, but I guess it's very hard sometimes to just equate that sort of behaviour to contentedness, if you like. Sure, I can look at a paddock full of cows and know that if there's a number of them resting and ruminating, that they've probably got a fairly good belly full. But I don't think I can't expect especially a small acre, a 10-acre block farmer to be able to be that understanding of animal behaviour. And I think it gives you a good indication of what's happening at the time. But unfortunately, what we need to do at this time of the year is start planning for the energy requirements that are going to be required through the pregnancy, so that everyone can be sure there's going to be reserve there to cope with this. So unfortunately, I think these, especially again the small acre farmer, sometimes they just don't understand that it's not just a matter of sticking a few sheep in a paddock. If you've got some pregnancies and everyone wants some little lambs running around, and that's what farming's all about, sort of thing, in Canterbury, producing good lambs, and traditionally, they need to understand that you have to plan and you've got to have the feed available to get there in the first place without major problems.
But you can overfeed as well?
Can overfeed, and that's obviously going to result in a few problems with sheep. For instance, you may well get either oversized lambs if you're not in the position to be investing in scanning and things, and you can't partition feed to singleton versus twin bearing ewes. You can get overfat sheep, which will give you lambing complications. You can get oversized lambs, which are going to give you problems as well. In the cattle situation, we have a rather special situation in that we know we're going to have to mobilise body fat following birth to to keep up with milk production, and so if you've got an over-fat animal initially, then we're going to obviously have some special metabolic problems from a vast amount of fat mobilisation following that.
Nick, there must be a time when we go from, in a starving animal, from slipping because of starvation, for the want of a better term, to sleepy sickness.
Yeah, so basically this is again a great, this disease, sleepy sickness or pregnancy toxemia as it's sometimes called, is a great example of how important it is to get your hands on your stock, because through pregnancy obviously the babies are going to be needing more and more and more energy as they're growing, and so the rule of thumb, the basic understanding is that we need to have a rising plane of nutrition through the pregnancy, and if that's not occurring, we're going to start drawing from the ewe, and we're going to start losing body condition. And you know, every sleepy sickness ewe, once you actually go and see it, put your hands through the fleece, there'll be a bag of bones. So if you know, it's not rocket science. If we can detect that we're losing condition rather rapidly in these animals, we can preclude this problem.
But Nick, people will say they're on the pasture and I've been feeding them hay.
Yeah. Okay. So my argument to that is that right from the start, you should be aware that if you think you're going to maintain decent pregnancy in a number of animals, I'll tell you straight away that probably hay is not going to do it. If you want to maintain body condition and health in animals that don't have major energy draws on them, then hay may be an okay option, but you're not going to produce very good lambs, and you're certainly not going to produce calves feeding pregnant animals hay.
So very briefly, what should you give them?
Well, you're going to need to have a higher energy dense diet than that, and that's the limitation. So that may mean that you've got to, if you've got the availability, then larger farms may look at baleage or silage feeding, and if you haven't got that, then you may need to look at alternative feed sources, which unfortunately cost. And that may mean you might delve into looking at lucerne crops, things like that, and lucerne hay. You may need to seriously start looking at actually sheep pellets and these sort of things, which really easily blow out the budget. And hence the issue is why 10-acre block farmers, you're not going to make income off it. It's called a lifestyle farm for a reason.
For a very good reason, Nick. Thank you very much indeed. Still to come on the program, we're going to be talking further about nutrition, and of course Linda from Federated Farmers. Welcome back to the program. Site visits by councils. Now that's something that's just quietly sort of sneaked in under the radar, and it's happening.
It is happening, and we're not talking here about compliance and enforcement visits for people who are breaking the rules. If that's happening, you definitely need to ring 0800 Farming or talk to your lawyer.
Yep.
But this is where a lot of councils are in the process now of reviewing their district plans. And as part of that process, they are wanting to engage with farmers and to come on farm and have a look at things like outstanding landscapes, significant areas of Indigenous vegetation and wetlands, and now to the coastal environment, which is something they have to map under the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, and also now in Canterbury, cultural landscapes as well.
That's a new chapter by the sound of your voice.
It is very much a new chapter too, and so there's farmers who are old enough to remember back in the 1990s when the
it's not that long ago. I can remember back in the 1950s.
20 years ago. It's a bit scary, isn't it? May well remember, or may well have been engaged in what were very lengthy and quite litigious processes with councils, mapping outstanding landscapes and significant areas on people's farms. It was quite a horrid process really for everybody, and those district plans are now up for review. To their credit, a lot of councils have very much looked at the previous process and gone, that's not good, and we're going to do it properly this time. We're going to go out and we're going to talk to our farmers. We're going to go onto their land and see where these sites are and do they have the values that are worthy of protection. So that gets a tick from a lot of people. But there are also some farmers who have been through this process before who are very adamant that farmers shouldn't engage with councils in this process and are lobbying quite strongly about that. So of course a lot of farmers are a bit stuck in the middle wondering, well, what do I do? Should I have these site visits from the council or shouldn't I?
Is it something they can bail out of? I mean, if IRD want to come and go through with a fine-tooth comb your accounts, you can't stop them.
Exactly. It's a very good question. And our position in Federated Farmers is really about just making sure farmers are aware of all the pros and the cons of both options. You can refuse a site visit. You don't have to engage with the council in this, but it's important people realise that refusal doesn't mean that these things will go away. You may still find a district plan that's got your farm with a site identified on it or mapped into the coastal environment, whether you've had a site visit and agreed to it or not. So your agreement is not conditional on that going into the plan.
So basically, what are you trying to stop them doing? Coming in and seeing something which they would add to it, perhaps?
So the disadvantages, and the lobby groups who tell farmers not to do this, the big disadvantage is that once the council has this information, it is public information. It's on the record, it's available for other people to look at. There's also some people who feel it's just an invasion of private property rights, so you don't engage in the process. But that is definitely the downside of it for some people, is it's public information. But as I said, the positive side of it with a lot of councils is that it is an opportunity to discuss whether these areas have those values and what the rules might be that go around them. For people who don't want to engage, there is still the opportunity you can still make a submission on the plan and support or oppose what's identified on your property, whether you have a site visit or not. In fact, it's very important people do that, because that's the only way to be in the process.
They get access to it before it becomes rubber stamped, obviously.
Yes, yeah. But the flip side of engaging is that there is a risk for some people that you'll end up with that site that you might be absolutely convinced shouldn't be in, is in, and some people are concerned that doesn't mean that other sites might be identified as well.
Linda, can we just focus in a wee bit? If, for example, a farmer's got an area that they suddenly decide is historical or of whatever importance nationally because of native bush, what powers have they got to stop that farmer farming that?
Well, once it's identified in the district plan, often it will have rules around it that require resource consents for things that you can and can't do. So typical would be rules around earthworks, vegetation clearance, sometimes around grazing. And it depends very much on the individual council, so those rules can vary quite a lot from council to council. So that's part of that whole negotiation package, it's two parts. The site and also what's going to hang off it in terms of restrictions around land use.
That's very scary.
It is quite scary. I mean, some farmers are quite comfortable with it, depending on what the rules are. Some people actually like it because it's a way of protecting things that they value on their farm. But also, understandably, it's pretty scary for some farmers.
See, what is hurtling around in my mind is the QE2 Trust, for example. I mean, so many farmers have retired brilliant land because they want to, for the QE2 Trust. But they did it because they wanted to, and not because they were told they had to. That's
right, and that's actually a very good alternative option. What we tend to find is that if you're quite keen to do something but you don't want to do it through your council, QE2 Trust is, of course, the other wonderful option, because you're quite right, Rob. You are the decision maker with the QE2 Trust. And actually, I was at a field day. It was our AGM actually last Friday when James Guild, who's chairman of the QE2 Trust, was speaking, and he was saying we've got over 4,000 covenanters now in the QE2 Trust and 189,000 hectares of private land in QE2 covenants, and that's all done by farmers or voluntary.
Yeah. So it speaks volumes.
It does, doesn't it?
It does, Linda. Thank you very much indeed. Your phone number, 0800, is at the end of the program for people who want to get some advice.
It is.
Next up, we will be talking to Pierre about nutrition. back to Rob's Country. Microbial tools, Pierre, what are they?
Well, if we think about microbial tools, and often we think also then of probiotics. And probiotics, unfortunately, has become such a cliched word, and how people really look at probiotics. So microbial tool is probably a better way of looking at it, and how we think about using microbes in the rumen, in the soil, in different areas, in a farming or agricultural environment.
It's interesting you say soil as well as inside animals.
It was interesting when I listened to somebody at one stage, a soil scientist, that was talking about soil as being the rumen of pastures. And coming from animal science side, I always think about the rumen and the effect of the rumen and how that feeds the animal at the end of the day. And that rumen population is made up hugely of microbes. So that is where we really get back to the microbial tool aspect in terms of maintaining and establishing a good microbial balance in the rumen. And if that rumen may be the rumen in the animal or the rumen for pasture and the soil.
Exactly. How do they use it? How does it get adapted?
Animals have got a huge, as I say, a huge amount of microbes in the rumen. And if you feed anything that may prevent those organisms or bacteria in the rumen to die down or not function as they should, we affect the animal's health status. So in the olden days, it was quite interesting when you would bring animals from one area to another area, and you would just put the stomach tube down the animals, draw out the rumen fluid from the animals that's there, and inoculate the new animals with that same rumen fluid. So what we're doing with a microbial tool is exactly that. We're inoculating the animal with the microbes, the positive microbes, to establish and utilize food efficiently.
See, I've always found it intriguing that stud stock breeders, when they go from a show from their property to one on another island, for example, will take their water with them.
Yes. Well, the water side is something a bit different because water does have a taste, and it may be bore water or it may be chlorinated water. So if you actually take animals to a show, and you know that that show has got chlorinated water, quite often the farmer will then start feeding his animals with a chlorinated water product to get them used to the chlorinated water, or he would take his own water for his animals to consume.
Because what I'm saying is that the gut must be that sensitive.
The gut is that sensitive, absolutely. And using, again, going back to microbial tools, when we move animals from area to area, when we change the diet of those animals, every time we need to establish another sort of microbial population. And that's where microbial tools come in as well. So if we move animals or we change the diet of those animals, that's a stress situation. And we need to change the microflora that can utilize the feed.
Because even with humans, I guess if you go from eating toast every morning to going to muesli, there is a reaction. I mean, I found that when I did that recently.
Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of this comes from, where in human nutrition, we are very much on the same basis of using microbial tools, using probiotics, eating yogurt. I mean, a lot of the yogurts that we've got on the shelves now is marketed as a probiotic yogurt. And that just establishes good gut health for the human population in yourself. And if you've quite often when you're using a product and you start to get diarrhea, the advice that you will get from the doctor will be eat a probiotic yogurt, and that settles your stomach.
Yeah. Antibiotics versus probiotics.
Well, then on the same sort of basis again, anti meaning against. So antibiotic is against life in a sense, and a probiotic is for life. So if we think about a probiotic, we're actually establishing a viable microflora. If we're using an antibiotic, we're actually killing the microflora. So quite often if we use an antibiotic, we need to follow that up with a probiotic because we've killed the microflora and we need to establish healthy microflora again. And that's quite often what doesn't happen. And especially if we think about calves that are being fed and milk that's been taken out of the vat because of using an antibiotic, we're feeding that to our calves, and we are actually killing off the healthy or the positive microbial flora that calf needs. So then we really need to follow up those calves with a probiotic product.
I hadn't thought of that because, yeah, obviously, I mean, if you do whatever you give the cow, it's going to go right through, isn't it?
Yes. And it's it's quite interesting as well, on the same thing with humans, where a doctor will prescribe an antibiotic for a person, and at the same time, we will also prescribe a probiotic to re-establish the microflora in the gut that's been killed off by the antibiotic. So we need to think in the same terms if we talk about animals.
Very briefly, you've got some workshops coming up throughout the country.
Yes, and I think it's important that people start to get their heads around using microbes on the farm. So there are a couple of workshops coming up.
If you can just very quickly say where and when.
So Ashburton, Tuesday the 19th of April. Oamaru area, Wednesday the 30th of April.
Yep.
Outram, Thursday the 1st of May. Clydevale, Tuesday the 6th of May.
I'll carry on from there next week, but thank you very much indeed. That's very, very important information. If you're into it, I think you should be there. But BioBrews and other phone numbers on your screen now. I'm Rob Cope-Williams, and he's just walked away from Vegan Shot as well. You've either been watching or you've just missed Rob's Country, but I will be back with a lot of other neat people at the same time next week. Until then, bye now.